Are you ready for Carnaval? Stay tuned. Hi everybody, welcome to So You Want to Live in Bahia. My name is Kitty and I'm a gringa living here in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil for 11 years. And I'm a real estate agent. And today we're going to talk about the most important week of the year in Salvador, hands down, and it's Carnaval. And you all know about Carnaval. By the way, Carnaval here is spelled C-A-R-N-A-V-A-L, not Carnival. So Carnaval here in Brazil. First off, let's figure out how the dates are determined. I'm going to give you the hard way to figure this out and then the easy way. So Carnaval ends on Ash Wednesday and then 40 days of Lent happens. So this is the day before you have to go on Lent for 40 days. Now, how is that figured out? It's figured out by how Easter is figured out, which after March 21st, the first full moon is when Easter, that Sunday after the first full moon is when Easter happens. And so, but what's tricky, so then you would count backwards, but it's not 40 days backwards, it's 46, because the 40 days of Lent do not include Sundays, because you should be living like that anyways on Sundays. So that is how Carnival's figured out. It depends on the full moon, depends on Easter, but the easiest way for you to figure it out is just Google the dates and you'll find out. This year it's starting on the 17th, I guess you can say, but Carnival technically starts on a Friday and goes until Tuesday, but here it starts more like on Wednesday. So, and then the weekend before that there are parties, so it's not just those 5 days. The Carnival party actually came from the Greeks and the Romans, if I'm not mistaken, and was brought over by the Portuguese, and it was an interesting time. You'll see old footage of the poor people would dress rich, and it was considered a time where people didn't have class. Everyone was sort of treated the same. And this is in the respect of, it seems kind of juvenile, but the beginning Carnival was just people throwing stuff at each other, throwing buckets of water and mud. And so even rich people had water thrown at them. It was just what was going on. It was not that big of a deal. I learned a lot about Carnival in the Carnival Museum in Salvador. I totally recommend it, especially if you go on a Wednesday, because Wednesdays are free. And so that's right in Pelourinho, and it has a lot of cool costumes and archival footage. Definitely worth checking out. And that's where I also learned that not, in addition just to water and to mud being thrown, like pieces of meat were being thrown at each other. I don't know, I don't really understand why. But that was called an intrudo. And then eventually all that throwing of stuff gave way to actual parties and music in the streets. Now what's interesting about the Carnival here in Salvador is it's different than other places. In Rio and São Paulo, what comes to mind are the samba dancers. Samba, you hear lots of samba, you have the samba dancers in all the exquisite costumes, and in those situations you would go and you'd be you would watch, you wouldn't participate, you'd be watching that happen. And that doesn't happen here. That whole pasista, that style of samba that's so famous in Rio and also popular in São Paulo, it's not a thing here. You don't see it. Sometimes some of the singers of the bands will dress up like pasistas, but they are not, it's not a thing here. What is a thing here is a street party that you are participating in, which is kind of cool. And it's considered the largest street party in the world. They say that more than 2 million people come to Salvador just for Carnival. It's huge, the city size. Bahia, where there's a large concentration of people for Carnival, like triples in size of how many people are here on the streets. It's quite wild. I definitely think it's a bucket list item. If you hadn't thought about coming here for Carnival, think about it, because it's really an experience you'll never forget. Anyhow, some point the samba schools took over in Rio and it became this party where they dressed in the samba outfits and in costumes. But here it became a party where people would be on the street playing music. And in 1950, this party really changed when Dodo and Osmar created the first trio elétrico. And we'll look through a couple photos here, but trio elétrico is, they were in a car. They were 3 people, a trio, and they were plugged in, electric, and they were on top of this convertible and playing music. That census morphed into flatbed trucks carrying the artist on top singing. And sometimes these flatbed trucks also, depending, sometimes it's just one, but if it's a big artist like Ivete Sangalo, it could be 2 or more, and one of those will include a bathroom for you to go in, and they sell drinks and stuff. I'm gonna go over the specifics of that in my next video because there's a lot to understand about Carnaval. And in the next video, I'm gonna go over do's and don'ts so that you can have the best experience possible here. So there's drumming. Do you hear that? Do you like what I made? This is for Carnaval. This is not, people don't always wear stuff like this, but it's just to get into the spirit. At Carnaval, you can either be on the street not paying anything, and that's called pipoca. Pipoca because that's popcorn, and it looks like everyone's jumping up and down like popcorn being popped. Or you can go behind a trio elétrico, which you pay for an abada, and that's your ticket into Carnaval. Also, another way you get an abada is if you're part of a camarote. A camarote is 1 or more stories above the ground where you have a really good view of the trios passing by. Now, speaking of abadas, just to get into a little bit more of the history, abadas used to look like this. This is wild. I didn't realize this till recently. They used to be very long. And I unfortunately don't have any old photos of people wearing this, but this was what people used to wear. And now eventually, the abada...
2,000 years later.
Also, side note, abada comes from the Moors. So in the Portuguese and Spanish language, there's a lot of words that start with the letter A that don't really seem to fit in, don't seem to be Latin, and like açafrão, abajo, and in this case also abada. So basically, yeah, when I first came here, I was like, oh my God, this t-shirt costs 400 reais. It's not even nice, it's polyester. No, the t-shirt doesn't cost that much. It's your ticket. You wearing that is your ticket to get in. So when you jump into the bloco at any point, behind the trio electrical, they'll know that's you. Okay, you paid for the ticket. Fine, you're paid up. In addition to that, if you go to a camarote, you have to wear the t-shirt and also show a ticket. And you'll see also, I recommend ladies, it's a one size t-shirt normally, and so you're going to want to cut it up, do something creative with it so you look cute and not like you're wearing a dude t-shirt. So last but not least, for Carnaval here in Salvador, there are 3 circuits. The first circuit is in 1950 more or less, yeah, right when with the first trio elétrico, and that's in Campo Grande. And that is, you'll see here on a map, this is where all the 3 circuits are, and they're pretty close to each other. So that is the first circuit. And then in the early 1980s, the most famous circuit, the Barra Ongina one, which starts with the photo de Barra and ends in Ongina. And this is where all the major bands play. They always play this circuit. Smaller bands as well. And you'll see it's actually a quick walk if there's no Carnival. But when it's Carnival, from the start from the Farol to the end to Ongina, there's probably at least 4 hours where you're just behind this trio dancing. It's tiresome. You have to have a lot of energy for that. And when you get at the very end, you can take a moto taxi back home, because after being 4 hours on your feet, you're probably not going to want to walk back to Baja. And then the third circuit, it's not really so much of a circuit because it's not like point A to point B, just lots of little parties that happen, is in Pelourinho, and I really like that one. They have a lot of the more cultural stuff for kids. It's where I saw for the first time the big heads that they wear in Recife that's famous in the Olinda Carnaval. Those old-timey big-ass paper mache heads, and also I've seen indigenous groups performing as well, and their costumes are quite lovely. And so I do recommend trying to go up there at least one day. The problem is it is a little bit hard to get around here for Carnival, but we'll go over that in part 2. Anyhow, that's it for this part 1 of Carnaval. It's an exciting time. Part 2 is going to be the nitty-gritty, you know, the things you need to know. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I appreciate y'all. Beijos!